The date was October 9, 2002. Northwest Airlines Flight 85, a Boeing 747-400, was en route from Detroit, USA to Narita, Japan. Below, the vast, icy expanse of the Bering Sea stretched for countless miles. The aircraft carried 386 passengers and 18 crew members. For hours, the journey had been unremarkable, a routine trans-Pacific crossing. Inside the cabin, passengers were settled, some watching movies, others sleeping, blissfully unaware of the drama about to unfold. The flight deck was calm. The experienced flight crew, consisting of Captain Frank Gieb, First Officer Mike Fagan, and 2 relief pilots, monitored the instruments. Suddenly, without any warning, the massive aircraft gave a violent, uncommanded lurch to the left. The autopilot, unable to comprehend or correct the aggressive movement, abruptly disconnected. Alarms blared through the cockpit, a cacophony of urgent electronic warnings. The pilots were jolted from their routine, their senses instantly heightened. The serene atmosphere vanished, replaced by urgent concern and the immediate pressing question: what was happening to their aircraft? The 747 began to bank steeply, its nose starting to drop. Control was slipping away, thousands of feet above the unforgiving sea. The initial shock quickly gave way to focused action. Captain Gieb and First Officer Fagan grabbed their respective control columns. They fought to level the wings, to bring the aircraft back under their command. But the 747 was not responding as expected. The lives of over 400 souls now rested squarely on their shoulders, in the thin air high above the remote Bering Sea. The source of the terrifying instability was located deep within the tail section of the Boeing 747. The aircraft's rudder, a large control surface on the vertical stabilizer, is crucial for controlling yaw, the side-to-side movement of the aircraft's nose. On Flight 85, this vital component had suddenly and catastrophically failed. It wasn't just unresponsive, it had moved to an extreme position and become stuck. The lower rudder power control module, a complex assembly of hydraulic actuators and valves, was the culprit. A fatigue crack had developed in the manifold of the lower rudder power control unit. This tiny, insidious crack, growing over time, finally reached a critical point. Under the immense hydraulic pressures required to move the rudder of such a large aircraft, the manifold fractured. The result was a hardover. The lower section of the rudder deflected to its maximum travel, approximately 17 degrees to the left, and then jammed solidly in that position. The pilots in the cockpit had no direct indication of what precisely had gone wrong with the rudder system itself, only its terrifying effects. The unseen failure had turned their reliable jet into an unpredictable beast. In the cockpit of Northwest Flight 85, Captain Gieb and First Officer Fagan were engaged in a desperate struggle. The aircraft was oscillating, banking up to 30 to 40 degrees. Each time they managed to bring the wings towards level, the jammed rudder would assert its dominance, pulling the nose left and initiating another terrifying roll. Their immediate actions focused on using the ailerons, controlled by the yokes, to counteract the roll. They applied full right aileron, trying to lift the left wing and push down the right, but the rudder's influence was powerful, making their inputs feel sluggish and partially ineffective. The physical exertion was immense. Holding the control column against the relentless aerodynamic forces was exhausting. The pilots had to work in concert, coordinating their efforts. They knew that maintaining control was paramount. Losing it completely would mean an unrecoverable dive into the frigid waters below. The aircraft was not only banking but also skidding through the air, an uncomfortable and unnatural sensation for everyone on board. The relief pilots, also present in the cockpit, assisted by monitoring systems, communicating and providing support. The battle was far from over. They were simply trying to survive the initial onslaught of the failure. As the pilots fought for control, they simultaneously sought guidance. The Quick Reference Handbook, or QRH, is the Bible for pilots in an emergency. It contains checklists and procedures for a vast array of potential malfunctions and abnormal situations. The crew immediately began searching for a procedure that matched their predicament. However, the specific scenario they faced, a lower rudder section completely jammed at a significant deflection with no response to pedal inputs, was not explicitly covered. The existing procedures for rudder issues often assumed some level of residual control or a different failure mode. The crew had to improvise, relying on their fundamental understanding of flight dynamics. They were, in effect, writing the procedure as they went along, experimenting with control inputs to see what effect they had on the struggling aircraft. With the aircraft barely under control and no immediate solution apparent from their manuals, Captain Geeb made the crucial decision to declare an emergency. He keyed the microphone, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the background noise of alarms and straining systems. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, Northwest 85, we have a flight control problem." These words, universally recognized as a signal of grave and imminent danger, were transmitted to the air traffic controllers at Anchorage Air Route Traffic Control Center. The controllers on the ground at Anchorage Center immediately understood the gravity of the situation. They acknowledged the Mayday call and requested details. The pilots of Flight 85 explained their predicament: an uncommanded left bank, difficulty maintaining control, and a suspected rudder issue. The decision to divert to Anchorage, Alaska was made swiftly. As Northwest Flight 85 battled its way across the sky towards Alaska, word of the unfolding emergency reached Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport. The airport's Emergency Operations Center was activated, and a full alert was declared, mobilizing all necessary personnel and resources. Fire trucks from the airport's fire department, along with mutual aid units from the city of Anchorage, were dispatched to staging areas near the designated runway. Paramedics and ambulances stood ready, preparing for the possibility of a crash landing and mass casualties. The atmosphere at the airport became one of focused urgency. Runway 32 was initially selected for the landing, chosen for its length and alignment with the prevailing winds. However, the pilots would later request runway 25 right due to their control difficulties. The lives of over 400 people depended on the skill of the flight crew to get the aircraft to Anchorage, and then on the preparedness of the ground teams to handle whatever outcome transpired upon its arrival. The hours it took for Northwest Flight 85 to reach the vicinity of Anchorage were an eternity for those on board, and a period of intense focus for the flight crew. Captain Geib and First Officer Fagan, along with the relief pilots, took turns at the controls, battling the relentless leftward pull of the jammed rudder. They continued to use a combination of right aileron and asymmetric thrust, more power to the right engines, less to the left, to maintain some semblance of directional control. As they neared Anchorage, the challenge of descending and preparing for landing loomed large. Slowing the aircraft and configuring it for landing, extending flaps and landing gear, would change its aerodynamic characteristics, potentially exacerbating the control problems. The pilots had to meticulously plan their approach, discussing every maneuver. They knew that the final stages of flight, close to the ground, would be the most critical. The weather conditions at Anchorage were thankfully reasonable, but even in clear skies, landing a crippled 747 was a monumental task. The crew communicated their intentions and difficulties to Anchorage Approach Control. The tension in the cockpit, and on the ground, was almost unbearable. The runway lights of Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport finally pierced the Alaskan twilight, a welcome sight for the beleaguered crew and passengers of Northwest Flight 85. The final approach was a testament to the pilot's extraordinary skill and coordination. Captain Gabe was at the controls for the landing, with First Officer Fagan assisting, calling out altitudes and airspeeds, and managing the throttles for the crucial asymmetric thrust. The giant Boeing 747, still fighting their inputs, crabbed and yawed its way towards the threshold of runway 25 right. Every correction was a battle, every gust of wind a new threat. With incredible precision, wrestling the yoke and orchestrating the engine power, Captain Geeb managed to align the massive jet with the runway just moments before touchdown. The aircraft's main landing gear made contact with the pavement, not a gentle kiss, but a firm, solid arrival. The leftward yaw caused by the jammed rudder was still present, and as the aircraft slowed, the pilots had to use differential braking and reverse thrust carefully to keep it on the runway. A wave of immense relief washed over the cockpit. They had done it. Against all odds, they had brought the crippled behemoth and its 404 occupants safely to the ground. The successful landing of Northwest Flight 85 was not just a stroke of luck, it was the direct result of exceptional piloting skills, effective crew resource management, and the courage to innovate under extreme pressure. In the aftermath of the harrowing flight, the National Transportation Safety Board launched a thorough investigation into the incident. The focus was on the Boeing 747-400's lower rudder power control module. Investigators meticulously examined the failed component, confirming that a fatigue crack in the PCM's cast housing had led to its catastrophic rupture. This allowed hydraulic fluid to escape, causing the actuator to move the rudder to its stop and remain jammed. The incident involving Northwest Flight 85 served as a stark warning to the aviation industry. It highlighted a potential vulnerability in the design of the 747's rudder control system. As a direct result of the NTSB's findings and recommendations, significant changes were implemented. Boeing developed new inspection procedures for the rudder power control modules on its 747 fleet to detect fatigue cracks before they could lead to failure. Furthermore, modifications to the rudder system were explored. The legacy of Northwest Airlines Flight 85 extends far beyond the relief felt on that October day in 2002.